Live from WTTW 11, this is Chicago Tonight. Here's Bob Surratt.
Welcome. On Chicago Tonight, the fire department is in hot water after inspections found filthy ambulances and untrained emergency personnel. Today, Mayor Daley said the fire department owes taxpayers more. Phil Ponce and his panel will look at what needs to be done to improve ambulance service. Two more popular Chicago movie theaters have just been put out of business by new giant multiplexes. We'll talk to an industry analyst and an independent theater owner about what's in the future for Chicago's movie theaters. From Chicago Stories, in 1906, the two teams in the World Series were the Cubs and the White Sox. Rich Samuels will have the proof that this actually happened. Chicago's baseball broadcasters are the topic of our midweek gathering at the press table tonight. From the Channel 11 vault,
Operator, well, could you help me place this call?
30 years ago, just months before he died in a plane crash, a rising singer-songwriter, Jim Croce, taped this concert at Channel 11. We'll show you some of that performance tonight. And later, I'll have one more thing about a mistake in today's Chicago Sun-Times. First, updating what's happening in Chicago tonight. Mayor Daley doesn't know when he'll make a decision about Chicago's next police superintendent, but he says he's interviewed all three of the finalists, saying all three are very good quality candidates. The Chicago Archdiocese has a new initiative designed to protect children from sexual abuse. A key element of the so-called Covenant to Protect Children is professional training of priests, religious, and lay staff. Baseball this afternoon. Kerry Wood was dominating. He struck out 11 and gave up just 4 hits in a complete game 2-0 shutout to sweep the Mets at Wrigley Field. The Cubs are now just 1 game behind first place Houston. The Astros play tonight. The Sox are at Minnesota this evening. By the way, it was 20 years ago tonight that they clinched their American League West Division title with a win against Seattle. The weather for tomorrow, one more summery day with sunny skies and a high of 82. Now to Phil Ponce and a look at the troubling story of dirty and poorly staffed city ambulances. Phil?
Bob, Mayor Daley angrily weighed in on the ambulance controversy today, saying that he is, quote, very upset and that the fire department should do a better job. At issue, the fact that state health inspectors found violations serious enough to take some of the units off the street for a time last week. Elizabeth Brackett has more on the two kinds of fire department ambulances.
The fire department is expected to issue new orders governing its basic life support or BLS ambulances like this one. The new orders are a response to the state's decision to temporarily yank 9 BLS ambulances off the street after inspectors found filthy conditions, a lack of equipment, and poorly trained emergency personnel. The city's 12 BLS ambulances are designed to respond to non-life-threatening calls, while the 59 advanced life support or ALS ambulances, staffed by more highly trained paramedics, take the critical calls. The fire department says the BLS ambulances have done what they were designed to do, and that's reduce the load on the ALS ambulances. Last year, 50,000 calls were made by BLS ambulances that in the past would have been made by the ALS ambulances. The decision to send an ALS or a BLS ambulance is made here at the 911 center. Operators ask a series of health-related questions, then decide which ambulance to dispatch. The new orders would require daily supervision and inspection of BLS ambulances by the fire department and establishes the senior-most emergency medical technician, or EMT, as the person in charge of the rig. But critics charge that it is the two-tiered system that is the problem, and unless all ambulances are converted to ALS ambulances, the problem will remain. For Chicago Tonight, I'm Elizabeth Brackett.
Now joining us to discuss Chicago's basic and advanced life support ambulances are Patrick Fitzmaurice. He's an ambulance commander and Illinois State certified paramedic with the Chicago Fire Department. And Dr. Mark Cichon. He's Director of Emergency Medical Services at the Loyola University Medical Center and Associate Professor in the Department of Surgery at the Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine. And we invited officials from the Chicago Fire Department, Firefighters Union, and the State Department of Public Health, and all were either unavailable or declined the invitation. Patrick Fitzmaurice, doctor, welcome to Chicago tonight. Mr. Fitzmaurice, you're a Chicago Fire Department ALS paramedic. That's the more advanced, that's the higher trained paramedic, and you're not here you're not here representing the fire department. You're here in your capacity as an individual paramedic. But what was your biggest concern?
My biggest concern is when the program first started, Deputy Commissioner Cortez Trotter was in charge of the program, and he's a paramedic, and he had a vision and he had a plan for the program. Well, when he was moved over to the 911 center and liaison with the federal government for terrorism, that goal was lost, and the operation of the Chicago Fire Department basically let the BLS ambulance just sit there and fester. They refused to let EMS personnel be in charge of these ambulances. So you had these two firefighters that are on the ambulance who have no supervision because they're being supervised by a battalion chief who has no EMS experience. And the funny thing about it was,
that the BLS crews did not get the kind of supervision to make sure that the ambulances are maintained in a way that they're supposed to, and that people aren't getting the training. The BLS crews aren't getting the training they're supposed to.
They were trained by Fire Suppression and Rescue, and they were managed by Fire Suppression and Rescue. The Tri-Data report from
firefighters as opposed to the people who.
And the Tri-Data report in 1999 said all EMS operations should be under the supervision of EMS or paramedics. Fire Suppression and Rescue declined to let that happen. You know, the paramedics do 265,000 calls a year. We have less than 100 complaints a year, and of them complaints, only like 10 are sustained. And that's because of the quality of our field supervisors. From Field Division South, Field Division North, it comes down. They set the bar very high for us, and they hold us to a high standard. These firefighter EMTs weren't held to the same standards that we were, and that's where the problem started.
Doctor, you're the medical director for a large EMS program. Your reaction to the fact that 9 out of the 12 BLS units were found to be either filthy or not adequately supplied, and about a third of the people who were interviewed on that particular day didn't know some of the basic answers to basic questions or how to operate a defibrillator.
I guess the initial response that I have as a medical director is obviously concern. But step back for a moment and look at the process. The process worked. And what I mean by that is someone had called a concern into the state investigated it, and for a period of time there were issues and concerns that were raised. But when you look at it, they quickly corrected them out.
And when you say the process worked, it wasn't somebody within the system who noticed it.
Correct.
It was somebody from the University of Chicago who saw one of these ambulances and thought something was wrong.
In that respect, you're correct. And the concern is always to be proactive rather than reactive. And people make an attempt to become proactive, and after a period of time that can run into problems, frustrations, and concerns. But the most important thing that the people need to remember is that this process did work. Those ambulance issues and concerns were addressed.
In fairly short order.
Well,
in
on
very
the state,
short order.
On the state level, it worked. Problem is, I see my field officer every day. Every ambulance in the
ALS field
ALS,
supervisor.
paramedic supervisor, sees my ambulance every day. We go over, we drill, we do training every day. He shows up at the hospital. He's supervising us. Like I said, the bar is set high for us. There's zero tolerance for what goes on in those ambulances. These guys, you take two firemen who've never been on an ambulance before, come out of the fire academy and say, here you go. When the program was first put out, like I said, Cortez Trotter had two people, high-ranking fire chief and a high-ranking EMS personnel, to mentor these people and help them through the program. He leaves, they're gone. All of a sudden, these guys are back out on the street all by themselves. Operation says, let it run. You know, it seemed like their only concern was, do we have two guys on the ambulance every day? That's just not going to get it.
No, the people you're talking about on the ambulance, they're union brothers. They're union brothers and sisters. You're in the same union, yes?
I felt bad for those guys, and I believe that they were put in an untenable situation. You cannot just put someone, I couldn't take you, put you in an ambulance, put you in a uniform and say, go to work, and then not supervise you, not help you. I mean, I know I'm repeating myself, but when the program first came out, there was a battalion chief who was also a paramedic, and a high-ranking paramedic that mentored. They were there every day when these 12 ambulances come out. The initial paramedics that went on the first ambulances, they rode on ambulances. Two firefighters rode on the ambulance with me for 2 days, 2 24-hour days. All of a sudden, when the change came and Deputy Commissioner Cortez Trotter leaves, all of a sudden now it's like we have no juice in the department no more. The paramedic's gone, and the thing just went down.
The BLS crews, Mr. Fitzmaurice, do you think that the men and women who are in those crews, do you think they want to be there?
I don't know if they naturally want to be there. They see themselves as firemen. Their primary mission is fire suppression and rescue, and they do that very well. Let's not forget that. That is their primary mission. And one of the faults of the program is one day you're on the ambulance, and then 50 days later you show up on it again. There's no continuity. You know, 1 minute you're on a truck company, an engine company for days and days and days and days fighting fires. Then next thing you know, you're on an ambulance. Whoa, wake up. And you're on an ambulance that day with another guy who hasn't been there for 30 days. How's it going to work?
Dr. Sechon, one of the points that Mr. Fitzmaurice made earlier was the fact that the importance of supervision and the fact that he thinks it's key that the supervisors be paramedics as well. Do you see that as a necessary step?
Our experience in the Loyola EMS system has been that we have both paramedics as well as EMT basics. We have
both levels of expertise in supervisory positions.
In supervisory and functioning positions.
And can it work?
It has worked. Again, the purpose of pre-hospital care is to provide the best care possible for the patient in the settings that you're kind of forced to deal with. We have several municipalities that can't afford to have paramedics, can't afford the luxury of a paramedic service. We work with them. We work constantly with them. We train. My concept of training is to provide education to the medics, to the EMT basic personnel, just as if they're the same group of people.
By the way, how difficult is it to train somebody to use a defibrillator?
It's not difficult at all.
And so when you heard that there were some people who, according to reports, didn't know how to use a defibrillator, your reaction to that?
Again, that's something that, you know, not having seen what scenario they were placed in initially with that, it's difficult. I mean, if I were to come up to you and throw a defibrillator and say, show me how this works, it can be very intimidating initially.
I don't operate an ambulance.
I recognize that. I recognize that fact very well. Again, the point within the system of our system, and unfortunately that's the only one I can speak to, is the experience we have. We set a bar that's high. We work proactively to try to get all of our medics to be the best that they possibly can.
And you oversee a number of municipalities. What, did you say 36
we have
municipalities?
36 municipalities.
Training and oversight as to how they do their job. Mr. Fitzmaurice, did the ALS paramedics have any inkling of what was happening on the BLS side?
You don't have a lot of contact with them. The only contact you would have is on an override when they would be dispatched to a call, and then they would determine that it needed a higher level of care and they'd call for the paramedics. But for the most part, they didn't really get to see, because, you know, Chicago ain't the suburbs, and our fire suppression and rescue has resisted EMS since 1975, and they continue to resist it now. We had a shot.
Why?
And I don't know, you'd have to ask them. I think it's because they see their role declining and our role continues to increase. I think in a way a lot of it is sexist too, because a lot of our commanders in EMS, paramedics, are females. You don't see any top commanders in the fire department as females. I don't know, you'd have to ask them. But
And
they do see...
And a reminder, we did invite the fire department to be here tonight.
They do see their numbers decreasing as our numbers increase, and we make money for the city. We generate $28 to $30 million in revenue for the city.
Doctor, as an outsider, as you look at how the system in Chicago is operating, there are 59 ALS ambulances, the higher level. There are 12 BLS ambulances, the lower level. And if you look at the statistics for last year as to the number of runs, the percentage of runs that each made, it's pretty proportional. Would you say that it's working the way it's supposed to be, that BLS is freeing up ALS by and large?
As an outsider looking in, I think that a large component of it is working the way you would want it to work. I think that the city of Chicago, the citizens should know that people are working very hard and working proactively to correct a lot of the issues. both within state government, the State Department of Public Health, as well as within the medical directors of the city of Chicago.
And how well does BLS work in the suburbs?
BLS works very well. Remembering that they're here, there's a commitment by the fire chiefs to provide the best care in their municipalities. Again, because we are in the suburbs, there is a different push. There's a smaller segment and breakdown of the various communities, which makes response to the communities that they serve paramount to the fire chiefs, as well as to the officers and the coordinators of the various paramedic and BLS programs.
Mr. Fitzmaurice, if you're a patient, I mean, if you call in, if you're having a heart attack, you break a leg or whatever, if you call in, do you have a choice as to whether you're going to get ALS, the better trained, or BLS?
The problem with that is,
trained?
and it's always been the problem, is I always felt that paramedics on the scene should make the call as to the level of care, ALS or BLS. We see the patient. The call taker's taking information. Maybe, and most of the time, it's not the party who is sick. So they miss something.
How are you going to do that?
Well, I don't understand what you mean.
I mean, how can you make that determination as to
it's very difficult.
as to the
it's
level
very
of
difficult.
care?
You know, someone calls up because their mother is feeling sick, but what they don't tell her is that she's got some slurred speech and facial droop. So they send a BLS ambulance and it's a CVA. There's a lot of miscommunication, and the dispatcher's got to make a split-second call. But when the paramedics get there, it's simple. If you're ALS, you're ALS. If you're BLS, you're BLS. We make the call. The numbers, I'm not sure. They did 60,000. They did about 50,000 BLS calls. We did 265,000 ALS calls.
Right, but proportionately, it's not far off in terms of the number of units.
The thing that's off is the cost saving. It saves $200,000 to have the ambulance BLS. $200,000, that's 100 ALS runs. In 1 year, we pay for it. 100 ALS runs makes up that $200,000. I mean, we are generating a lot of revenue for the city of Chicago, and that's got to be taken into consideration.
Are the new rules going to make a difference? New rules issued by the fire department as far as supervision, as far as inventory in the ambulances and that sort of thing?
What always had to change was fire suppression and rescue has to understand and respect our mission. We respect what they do. We respect fire suppression and rescue. They need to respect what we do. We were starting to get that when we had a first deputy fire commissioner who was a paramedic. But like I said, we lost our juice. They don't respect what we do.
Doctor, when you see the story, what happened last week, that there were 9 ambulances that didn't have the right equipment or were filthy. I mean, you think about it, and when you think of what fire trucks look like, they always look great. They're always gleaming, and it seems like they have everything they need on them. I mean, just as an outsider looking at it. What does it tell you that, on the one hand, you have these fire engines, when you see them on the street, they look, you know, they look spotless, and then a story comes out that the ambulance is not so spotless, maybe.
Well, take that.
Is there a cultural bridge here that how do you bridge that?
Certainly, there will always be a cultural issue regarding fire department and pre-hospital care, fire suppression and pre-hospital care. Ways that can be bridged is, remember the concept that as a emergency care provider, whether it's for fire suppression, police, first response, or pre-hospital care, you're only as good as your last run. And the equipment that you have has to be maintained to the level that you need it for the next run. Many times we see ambulances leaving the hospital to make a run that don't have time to prepare, don't have time to get equipment because the calls are coming back in, back out, and they're one right after another. These are busy services, but there has to be some concept of proactivity to maintain a level of commitment to the patients you're serving, to the communities you're serving, and to provide that level of service that people expect.
And that'll have to be the last word. Patrick Fitzmaurice, Dr. Cichon, thank you both for being here tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bob, back to you.